Sugar is a controversial subject. Now, sugar is a natural component that we even find in vegetables, just how much and what type. There are three primary basic types of sugars. One is monosaccharides, second is disaccharide, and the third is polysaccharides. Now you have derivatives of this, like oligosaccharides as an example, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to focus on let's keep it simple, where we talk about the three basic types of sugars. Now the saccharides they're basically glycosidic chains. So when you have a monosaccharide, it's a very simple sugar, such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. That's how we look at them biochemically. And it's the amount of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, like C6, H12, O6. As an example, gives you a basic format, a chemical format. But it's important to understand that sugars are built up. It's how many chains that are associated. So a disaccharide, two chains that are attached, and then polysaccharides are obviously many chains of sugars that are attached. But the important thing to understand with sugar is, number one, it's one of the high caloric foods that we have. It's not the most, lipids are, but it's one of the primary food sources that we have. Now, carbohydrates, sugar, basically are the main primary staple of mankind. They have been for thousands of years. But by manipulating the saccharide as an example, or changing it, what we've done is their alcohol sugars are like mannitol, sorbitol, things like that. They form within our system, so they're considered natural to some degree, but they're also used in the industry for people that may not want to spike sugar as much, like diabetics. Some of these things are used as an adjunct to using, as an example, disaccharide. So it's important to understand that sugars are important for our system. They're found naturally. As an example, myo-inositol is produced naturally within our system. We synthesize it, but it's the amount. It's how much we take in, the frequency of consumption as an example, the manipulation as an example. Let's take a look at alcohol, ethanol. Ethanol is a type of sugar, actually, and it just has a different type of molecular structure to it. Now, what's interesting with ethanol is it surprised a lot of people. Ethanol is not only harmful to our health in the ways where it can hurt the Kupffer cells, the Paddock cells, as an example, but a lot of people don't realize this, that alcohol, ethanol, when it's derived from plant sources, is radioactive. Now, it's not radioactive in the high source that you see at Fukushima, as an example, but that's how you determine, or we determine, if ethanol is from a source that is from plants, is if it has a radioactive decay to it, or radioactivity footprint, not decay, but a footprint. It's because we receive radiation, plants receive radiation from the universe, whereas the other type of ethanol production or alcohol production can be from things like coal, things that we find within the earth where the radioactivity is gone. It's basically depleted. And that's one way of defining if ethanol, believe it or not, has been made from plant sources. But there's an example of a type of sugar that can be harmful over a long period of time. Same situation with what we have with the disaccharide. Over long periods of consumption, heavy consumption can really initiate problems with our system, particularly the most common pathology that we've heard about, which is actually type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes. The monosaccharides are the simplest sugars you've heard of. Glucose, as an example, is one. Another is fructose, which is found in fruit. Now, what's interesting about fruit, or fructose, is it doesn't require insulin to be introduced into the cell, which is fascinating. That's why it's used frequently in individuals in a diabetic coma. Diabetic coma meaning to get them out because of the sugar depletion, the glucose depletion. To get that glucose into the cell is very important. Fructose plays that particular role. So sugars are important for us. That's number one to understand. But the abuse of sugar and how it's manipulated can be harmful for our health. So it's important to keep in mind that generally polysaccharides are the healthier forms of sugar, excluding from obviously things that we have in our system like glucose. Polysaccharides would be the whole grains as an example. That's a polysaccharide. Or think of this, the glycosidic chains are very long, they're complex, and it takes a longer period of time for the body to break them down. Anaerobic glycolysis is an example, a process of breaking down sugar and producing sugars in a long form fashion like a fine mist rather than a flood. Where if individuals continue to take sugars that are more simple, disaccharides as an example, they empty into the bloodstream extremely rapidly, directly. And this can throw off sugar, or not throw it off, it spikes insulin. The insulin is there merely as a hormone to put the sugar into the cell. That's its job. And these constant fluctuations, you've heard of hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. You have these changes that occur, these spikes. And these spikes, after a prolonged period of time, can really start to begin to influence our health in a negative fashion. One is weight gain as an example. The other is, as I mentioned before, is diabetes, an acquired type of diabetes. So when we look at sugars, it's important to understand that everything has them. You know, even you'll find them even in beans, legumes, as an example. Just because it doesn't taste sweet doesn't mean it doesn't have a sugar. So these are important to understand, is that sugar is an important process, number one, but the abuse of sugar, number one, and number two, the type of sugar can really demonstrably change our health status. And as many of us know, the consumption of sugar in America is vast, and we're not the highest consumer of sugar in the world. So keeping it in moderation, and hopefully that's what we're doing for you here with this whole series, is to show you that we can have things that taste delicious, can have things that initiate that sweet taste, because the tongue, as we know, has specific areas that detect sweetness. Sweet is good. Sweet is something that we've adapted to, we've evolved to want and actually biochemically need to some degree. It's its excess that can be detrimental to our system. So always remember, when you have foods with added sugars, some of these foods, these processed foods, you'll see, you look at the store, there's actually 3 different types of sugars that are added. They metabolically break down in different sequences, and that can actually add to an addictive nature to the food itself. Some of these foods are actually biochemically formatted to do just that, to where you crave more and more and more. So it's important to understand sugar is your friend. Just don't make it your enemy by abusing it. And I guess that's the best way to define this. Other than that, you'll find out if you slowly adapt or change your dietary regimen, that sugar will be something that you don't necessarily crave as much as you did before, because what we're doing in this series is to show you that these foods can liberate the sugar slower, and by a slow, steady stream, your appetite for sugar generally and usually will diminish to a point of where it's reasonable, and you're not running down to eat 4 gallons of ice cream. What else? Dip your wife or husband in chocolate and claim that you want to do it for a romantic status when you really want to eat the chocolate. Anything like that is, if you do it slow and you do it with a slow stream, your cravings will generally diminish, and you end up with a healthier lifestyle in general, or healthier health status by doing so. When we look at the necessity of sugar, and looking at glucose as an example, let's use that, the important thing for our lives. The brain lives off 2 things, oxygen and glucose. So we do need adequate amounts of glucose. It's the spiking of glucose that gets to be problematic, and that can create the obverse, which is the declination of sugar. It's just like fuel in a car. Your car needs fuel, but if you continue to flood the carburetor, then there will be a dysfunction within the car itself. So we do require sugar. What's important to understand is that slice of orange, if it's moderation, this is why when I speak to my patients about drinking a glass of juice, that's like drinking 8 oranges, which is not necessarily balanced. As an example, if you were to sit down and eat 1 orange, then have the amount of juice that would be equivalent to that 1 orange. That gives us an idea